Hey everybody, welcome back to Jim's Garage. Today we are concluding the Wazuh journey. Today we're going to be having a look at deploying the agents, having a look at some metrics, doing some testing, seeing how it performs, looking at monitoring and alerting, and basically bringing this product to life. I think if you're somebody who's interested in cybersecurity, has a job in cybersecurity, or just technology in general, this is an awesome platform to look at and learn because it's going to teach you the importance of monitoring your estate, setting up alerts, and being ready for when things go wrong. Right, without further ado, let's jump straight into the dashboard. If you do want to know how to set this up, please go and follow the previous video where I covered various installation options. So when logging in for the first time, we are greeted with the dashboard. And it's pretty boring because we don't have any agents installed. So the first thing we're going to do before we do anything else is to install some agents, and then we've got some statistics that we can actually start talking about. Now thankfully, to deploy an agent is dead straightforward and it's actually baked into the dashboard. So we can click deploy an agent. Then we're going to get options for which infrastructure we want to install this on. For this demonstration, I've got a couple of Linux machines, both servers. One has Docker installed as well. The other's just a vanilla server instance. And I've also set up a Windows 11 machine. So we'll start off with the Windows 11 machine and we'll do this quite quickly so we can get onto the interesting bit. Now what this is going to do is create a PowerShell script which we can then run on the machine to pull down the binary from this server already pre-configured. Now the server address, that's what we're on here. So in my instance, that's going to be the wazuh.jimsgarage.co.uk. I'm going to tick the remember the server address. Reminder that whatever machine you put this on, it needs to be able to resolve that DNS, otherwise just put in an IP address and be mindful of firewall rules. We can assign an agent name for this, so if you want to override what the actual agent is called, by default it's going to use the host name, which is going to be fine for this demonstration, but maybe you have a naming scheme within your organization and you want to change that. Obviously the beauty of this approach is that you can actually do this all through some tooling, so SIEM, etc. You could push this out, this agent, once you've configured the binary to all of your estate and do that quite seamlessly. Similar for the Linux approach, which we'll come on to in a moment. Now a good idea here would be to create some groups, and that's pretty straightforward. It's obviously a way to just group your machines. For example, you might have Windows 11 estate, you might have Linux estate, you might break that down further to servers, maybe even down to the levels of things like web servers, database, etc. That's totally up to you, but it's a good feature to have. So all we need to do here is basically to copy this command, and do take note of the requirements. You'll need admin privileges, PowerShell 3, and we basically then just need to start the agent after we've pulled it down. So I'm going to hop now over to that virtual machine through RDP and we'll get this up and running. So pulling up that VM on IP 200.114, just in case that's important later on in the dashboard, we need to invoke a PowerShell script as root. So we'll right click, run as an admin, hit yes, and then we should be able to paste that command in. So just by right clicking, we can see that we've got the URI that it's going to go and pull the MSI file down from. That's our server. We've then got the executable, we've got an environment temp variable, and then we've got the actual manager IP address as well. So we should be able to hit return there. We can see that it's now gone and fetched that. Next, we need to simply grab this command to start the service. Back over on the VM, let's paste that and let's get that started. So now the Wazuh service is starting. Let's head back now to our dashboard and let's just see what's happening there. So if we now go back to the main page, we can see that we've got one active agent and these numbers have increased. And lo and behold, surprise, surprise, yes, Windows 11 does have some inherent vulnerabilities that you might want to go and tweak. Albeit they're not criticals and highs, they're on the medium and low. So if we just click on this one here, you'll see that we've got that Windows 11 machine here. And if we click on that, we can start to drill down into it. We're not going to have a look at this right now. We're going to install the agent onto those two Linux boxes, and then we'll go through this extensively. So this time we're going to pick a Linux one. For me, it's going to be the Debian-based AMD 64, but obviously choose the right one that's for you. Now again, server address is going to be the same. I'm going to keep the same agent name. And then this time we're just going to run the wget command on that box. And then we're going to start it with the ctl command, with the systemctl command. So pulling up a couple of consoles to some machines I used in my previous checkmark video, we're going to paste in the commands here. We're going to hit return. Do the same on this one. This is obviously the one with Docker installed. And then we're going to run the sudo systemctl reloads, the agent, and the start of the agent. So copy that command. We'll head back now to those consoles. We'll paste those in, and fingers crossed, we should get everything up and running. And that's how simple it is to get all of this running. Let's hop back now into the Wazuh GUI, and hopefully we should see that we've now got 3 endpoints available. So now clicking back to this endpoint, we can see that we've got 1 active and we've got a couple that are coming online. Just give that a moment to refresh, and fingers crossed everything's there. Perfect, so a quick refresh and then everything popped up straight away. Now, if we head back to the dashboard and the summary, let's see what's going on. So now we've got 646 mediums and 494 low, but again, thankfully, no criticals or high severities with the default configuration. So with these agents deployed, let's take this now as our first glimpse into what Wazuh can provide for us through the dashboard. We'll then get on to deploying and doing some actions, and hopefully we'll get to catch those and do some reporting later on. So the good news is the dashboard is pretty much your one-stop shop for looking at everything. So we can do configuration assessments. That's really important to making sure that you've got hardened baseline images. So for example, here we can see that the default images that I've pulled, the Windows 11, which is just the ISO from the website, and also the Ubuntu Cloud 24 image. They look to be pretty good. Obviously, it depends on your risk appetite, your security posture, etc. You might not be happy with 682 mediums. These have triggered rule levels between 7 and 11, which is Wazuh's own kind of rule management system that you can go and tweak. We'll have a look at that later. But what's great to see is it gives you that configuration assessment off the bat. So anywhere you deploy this agent, you're going to get a configuration assessment of that inbox. And it's always a good idea to try and use hardened images where possible. Yes, it does make life more difficult. You kind of have to plan and build around it, but minimizing the attack surface is really important, and it's going to make your life a lot easier if you get this right from the start. We've then got malware detection, file integrity monitoring, so things like ransomware, for example, checking permissions and ownerships of files that are probably important to the system, for example. We've then got the threat intelligence side of this, where we've got threat hunting, so we can have a look at the alerts, the issues and the threats in your environment. We've got vulnerability detection, so this will look for common vulnerabilities, CVEs, typically things like old software that haven't been patched. One of the awesome things that makes this really powerful, especially in a security context, is MITRE ATT&CK. Now, this is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If you're not familiar with that, it's kind of the way that we assess as security professionals how people gain access into a system, gain persistence, and then move laterally throughout your network, usually compromising something on the edge that doesn't get detected, moving seamlessly within the system until they get to what they're actually after, and then they hit the payload button, and then you're in trouble. So what this will do is try to look for the threats and the vulnerabilities and try and assess that and map it towards the MITRE ATT&CK. So the idea being you'd work through the MITRE ATT&CK framework and you try to put controls in at various levels, a bit like the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, and you would then put those controls in to mitigate the likelihood or in fact just kind of stop it dead. Another awesome thing, and it comes more onto the kind of compliance side, if you're an organization that is heavily regulated, PCI DSS for payments, GDPR, kind of anyone who's dealing with European data falls under that, HIPAA if you're in health, the NIST 800 framework from the US, any of these kind of frameworks and standards, you can actually do a compliance exercise against your managed agents. So any agents you have on here on your estate, assuming you pretty much put everything on here, you can do some compliance checks. We'll do that later on. Lastly, we've got the cloud security section. So anything you've got within your cloud estate, you can also monitor, and it will leverage its understanding of vulnerabilities and best practice, server hardening, etc., to assess the risk and vulnerabilities associated with your cloud environment. So let's bring that to life a little. We'll have a look through some of these sections, and then we'll actually start to try and do something and get some alerts triggered. So let's have a look in the configuration assessment. So here you can see, and it's in the top right, you have to choose the agent that you want to look at. We've actually got the checkmark Docker host. So this is just a Ubuntu Server 24. It's a cloud image, and it's running just a default vanilla Docker installation. So if you're somebody who's basically downloaded that image, installed Docker, it's going to look like this. And you can see that from a CIS benchmark, that's the Center for Internet Security, they bring out a whole bunch of sort of good practice guides around hardening your servers. So the idea being that this is part of your cloud infrastructure. This could be internet facing. There's a ton of stuff in here that you want to go and tweak to gain an actual decent security posture. It doesn't come locked down out of the gate. There are hardened images you can use that are provided by cloud providers, but this one that I'm using, and I'm sure a lot of other people will be using it, you can see here that we've only got 99 that have passed on their assessment, and this is using the version 1 of the benchmark, and 138 that have failed. Now, most of these failures come down to things that are basically enabled, not disabled by default. And that's typically because the operating system will ship with some convenience and some quality of life. So it will actually have things that are enabled. Here we can see a bunch of kernel modules that are either not available or are available. And that's usually so that you can get things up and running. The idea being that you would go back then and lock this image down before you actually put it into some production environment. But here we can see, for example, ensure mounting of the CRAM file system is disabled. And if we click on that, the cool thing is we can actually then go in and see some real life examples of how to do that. So you can see here the checks that were run, and you can see where this falls in with compliance. And we've got all the big ticket items here. We've got CIS, we've got ISO 27001, we've got MITRE ATT&CK frameworks, we've got PCI DSS, and we've also got SOC 2. So that's not saying necessarily that you have to do all of these things to pass that. It's just giving you an idea of where this might be a problem, and also kind of where to improve and bolster your security posture to minimize the impact of a compromise. So when a compromise happens, if this is disabled, it's going to create another hurdle for the adversary. And basically you can go through all of this report. There's a page system down in the bottom right behind my face, and you can go through all of these and find out what's happening. Again, clicking on one is going to show you all of the details. So that's pretty awesome. So let's have a look now at what else there is. So if we do that same assessment this time, but we go to, let's say, Windows, because you're probably going to have a big Windows estate anyway, you can see things here that we're kind of all familiar with sysadmins and any InfoSec person. So ensure the password history is set to 24 or more passwords. We failed on that one. The maximum password age we actually passed on. But again, if we click on one of these, for example, it will tell you why it's actually failed. It will say the description, and then it will basically say which compliance standards have you failed on, or potentially could be an issue when you're trying to pass an audit. So again, really interesting to see that just a default vanilla installation of Windows 11 using the CIS Microsoft 11 Enterprise benchmark, this default that I downloaded, there were only 123 passed, 26% passed. So what's that? A 74% failure rate if you're wanting to apply and harden your image. So yeah, a lot of work to do there. The good news is that you could obviously run this. You could then go through and change all of these settings, and then you could get to a position where you're happy with the image you've got, and then apply those settings to your kind of standard image that you then deploy within your enterprise space. What's also quite handy with all of this stuff is you can actually export this as well. So maybe you want to put this into an Excel document, or you want to export it into, say, Jira or something like that. And you could create a ton of tickets off the back of this to actually then go and address all of these issues. Heading back to the dashboard, let's check out the malware detection. Now I'm hoping that this says nothing. And yeah, we've got nothing for Windows. We've got nothing for the checkmark demo, and we've got nothing for the Docker. So that's good. Obviously, if you've got a large end user estate over time, all but certain you're going to get some malware on those devices. Now, as to whether you've got an EDR solution or something like that that's going to pick it up, it should still get reported here in Wazuh. Heading back to the dashboard, let's have a look at the file integrity monitoring. Again, there's nothing here that it's warning us to. Let's just check the Docker one. No, that's fine. Now, one thing that I'm really interested in, and I have a lot of experience in, things like PCI DSS, GDPR, NIST. Let's have a look at how this holds up to something like PCI DSS. Now, we'll go for the Docker server just because you might be running some Dockerized or some containers for your hosted services that fall under the remit of PCI. And you can see here that we've got a number of issues around PCI DSS requirement 2.2. In fact, we've got 280 just in that category. We've also got something in 10.6.1 and 10.2.6. So if we want to have a look further into that, let's have a look at some of these controls. So here, for example, we've got requirement 2, and if we filter that, we can actually unfilter the others. So if we click on this one here, we'll actually get all of the issues that it found, and also a kind of indicative severity score. So let's say, look at this one, we've got the CIS Ubuntu Linux. So it ran a specific CIS benchmark for Linux on here. And what's it gone and found? Well, as you can see here, the clues in the title, this one is a summary. So if you want the actual findings, and those are kind of all listed below, we could take this one here, for example, let's tick this, and then we can see here that it's to do with the duplicate usernames. It's possible for an administrator to manually change the password file and change the username. So obviously this is all around sort of authentication, user access control, privilege management, etc. So you'll be able to go through each of these and then kind of tone that, change it, tweak it to the recommendations, obviously with kind of the rule IDs and also the recommendations for how to fix that as well. Now, I can't stress how important and informative and useful this would be for any sort of cybersecurity professional, any business that wants to get a good hold on their security posture, their compliance to certain standards. And the fact that this is free and open source is just amazing. You could even put this as part of your SDLC process, where you would maybe do a vulnerability scan or deploy an agent just to check what you're actually pushing out before you put it in production. Or you might even want to do this as a free alternative to some of the paid tools and then use one of those paid tools at the end. It could be a massive return on security investment by putting this in place. So having looked at an example of compliance for PCI DSS, we'll skip over the others, but they're broadly speaking going to be the same. So we've got 238 alerts there for NIST, and we'll be able to drill down and have a look at exactly what those are. The bits that I'm really interested in are some of the threat hunting, the threat intelligence, and crucially the MITRE ATT&CK. So looking at the threat, you can see we've got 2,659 total threats. Now, crucially, none of those are level 12 or above, which I believe are classed as kind of your common CVE criticals. But there are a ton of things that we probably want to go and address and have a look at. Again, we can also push this out for generating reports, so any sort of KPIs, KRIs that you need to produce, you could get the requisite metrics for supporting that. So what's useful here is we can actually see that the top 5 alerts, 99.84% of it is just a Docker error message. So it's probable that we can clear that up quite quickly just by making some tweaks to that Docker endpoint. And obviously, if you're replicating that in your estate, these messages would be magnified. Once you've got the solution for one, it's probably going to fix the solution for others. And so you could really quickly drive these vulnerabilities down. If you want to have a look at the events, and this is available on pretty much all of the tabs, you can see here the Docker error message here. And if we wanted to, we could click on this machine, which would take it to it. And then we can see what the actual problems are on this machine. Next, let's have a look at the vulnerability detection, which traditionally is going to take up a lot of time within the InfoSec and the operational technology space, because this is where you're going to be finding all of your vulnerabilities, and you're going to have to put tickets in place, you're going to have work programs spun up to go and remediate these vulnerabilities. Now actually clicking on this, and this again is just pinned to that checkmark Docker, you can see that we've got the 6 critical vulnerabilities, 211 highs, 355 mediums and 36 lows. So clicking on the critical, we get a breakdown of what they are along with their corresponding CVEs. That is a publicly disclosed notice for what that vulnerability is. Now these are pretty alarming. Some of these are quite old, so 2021 in that case. And you can see here that with corresponding values, we've got 2 that are 9.1 and we've got 4 that are 9.8. So these are definitely things that we would want to have a look into. So now having the critical severities selected, we can actually drill down into those. If we click on the inventory, here we'll see a list of what's actually going on in there. And then, as always, the beautiful thing with Wazuh is the fact that we can click on one of these and we can see what it's saying. So this looks like it's an attack, so frag attacks against mesh networks owing to the Wi-Fi protected access and those protocols. So we can go through and we can have a look at how to go and remediate that. There's references to the CVE records as well, which should provide us with information on what that actually is. So here we are on the actual website for the CVEs, and then we can find out how to go and fix this. So this is really powerful, and having this in a free open source software is amazing. You normally have to pay a lot of money to have this level of insight. So interestingly, the Windows machine doesn't actually show any CVEs. Now this is the latest version of Windows 11. This has been updated with the latest patch and the 24H2, etc. So it's not surprising that it hasn't picked up any vulnerabilities on this. So now let's take a look at the MITRE ATT&CK section. We know that we've got some vulnerabilities on there, but let's see how those have been mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, because we could then start to look at where it would make sense to implement new controls, invest in our security to hopefully disrupt potential attacks. So we can see here quite quickly that most of the attacks that we see here are around valid accounts, and it's things like privilege escalation, persistence, initial access, some of the things that I mentioned earlier, which this is what the MITRE ATT&CK framework is designed to do. It's supposed to be looking at how an adversary would attack your machines and move throughout your network until they find something juicy that they actually want to exfiltrate or something that they want to damage. So what's really awesome on top of this is you can actually go to the top and look at the intelligence, and this will give you some information around all of the persistent threat actors that are out there and what they generally try to do. There's also links to additional documentation if you want to go up and read that. For instance, everything you're seeing on here, if we go on the intelligence tag, these persistent threat actors, these have basically actively used or have seen these being used in the past. Now, they're quite generic, so most of them will do these sorts of things. Most of them will be using some of the same common tooling anyway. But we can actually go into things like the mitigations, and now we can start to see how we would start to mitigate some of these vulnerabilities on our machine. So this is basically spoon feeding you the answer to mitigate these threats. We can also see some of the software as well that would be used, so things you might want to look out for. Some of the tactics, so you can look down here and basically read up, so things like command and control for that persistence, calling home, etc. Credential access, trying to do that privilege escalation and lateral movement. Defense evasion, so they don't get caught. And then also some techniques that they might look for, so you could use these as, say, indicators of compromise. You could be checking things to have a look at. Now, if we actually go into the framework itself, you'll see here that it's basically the top 4 that we have issues with. If we move on to the events tab, you can see here all of the things that are happening. So we've got a number of logon successes. So that's me basically logging into the machine. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a compromise, but you could imagine a scenario where the person logging on as me isn't me. And obviously for things like that, you would want to know and log that. Now for this demonstration, I'm not going to go into anything like AWS or GCP or GitHub, but it's nice to know that you can monitor those. For Docker though, that is definitely something that most people in the home lab will probably be running, so I do want to manage my Docker host. And as you saw from the start, I did set up a Docker host. Now when I change the host up here over to that Docker host, you'll see that it's now pulled down a different dashboard, meaning that it has found Docker, but it doesn't know what to do with it yet. So let's go and fix that. Now to remedy this, we are going to have to install pip first, so we'll go ahead and do that. So after we've installed pip, we should then be able to pull down the requisite piece that we need to monitor the containers. Now after installing the pip package, and yes, this is system-wide, which doesn't follow best practices, but I just want to demonstrate this working, we're ready to move on to the next step. So now we've installed the package that's required, but we actually now need to go into the Wazuh agent configuration and change something to actually now use this, make sure that it's aware that it's installed. To do that, just grab your editor of choice, and we're going to edit the following file, which is the configuration file for the agent. So now that we're in this file, we need to add the following section. So I'm just going to paste it in here, and we need to add the WODL name of Docker listener. Make sure you get the indents right, and then we want to save that and we want to exit it, and then we want to restart the service running. So I'm going to restart now the Wazuh agent. That should go away, pick up that new configuration file, and fingers crossed we should start to see some things being populated in the dashboard. So now after a quick refresh, you can see now that it's picked up some metrics from the Docker. You can see we've got the top 5 images, the top 5 events of what's going on here, basically starting these containers after I restarted the machine. And we can see some resource usage over time as well. So again, pretty awesome that we're now monitoring the Docker environment. So we'll be able to monitor things like when containers come up, when they go down, who did that, i.e. which user, and various other things like traffic and all that kind of stuff, which in a security context would be really important, especially in something like a SIEM, whereby you want to be translating events across your network, checking timestamps of when things happened, so that you can understand and recreate the attack, part of that MITRE ATT&CK framework. So now after having a quick look through the dashboard and using some examples using the machines and the agents that I've deployed, let's have a little bit of fun on those machines. Let's try to install some stuff, maybe try some stuff that we would definitely want to be notified about. So things like escalation of privilege, deleting files, changing permissions. As with most things with Wazuh, the agent, there are a number of things that we probably want to tweak and tailor to our liking. So out of the box, it might not give you every single thing you want. So the first thing we need to download, according to the documentation, is the sysmon, the system monitor. Next, in the folder that we just created, we're going to create a new document. We're going to make this a XML, and we'll just call this one the sysconfig.xml, accept the warning. And then we're going to edit this. Now I'm pasting the following, which is taken from the official documentation, and we want to save that. So next we want to run the command prompt or PowerShell as an admin, and we're going to move to the following directory. Now that we're on here, we're ready to run the command necessary to execute. So in this instance, we want the sysmon64.exe, we want to accept the end user license agreement, and we want to specify the XML file we just created. So now that's going away, it started all those drivers, installed everything we need. Now that this is installed, we need to tell the agent now what to pass, a bit like we did in Windows where we added the additional configuration for Docker files. And we just need to check a place to paste the following in. It's going to be a local file, and it's going to be this one here. So this is going to be using that sysmon that we just enabled. You'll have to do net stop and then Wazuh, and then restart it with net start Wazuh, and that will apply that new agent configuration. Now that we've got the agent configured, we need to amend the manager so that it understands what to do when it gets that data. Now there is some baked in support off the bat, but we can improve that with some rules. So if you go to server management and then rules, you'll see all the ones that are currently added, but we want to add some new rules. We want to add the following rules, which you can see. So here we've got that sysmon process. We've also got the mimikatz as well. So we want to save that now. That's now saved, but as you see, we need to do a restart. So we'll do the restart, and then hopefully when that comes back up, those rules are now applied. So now with everything back up and running, let's open the mimikatz executable, and we should start to see some records for that. So now we've run the mimikatz executable, and hopefully that should have, just by opening that, fired an alert within the Wazuh manager. So now in the manager we can see we've got one high severity which came in, and you can see here that this was an alert, and we've got this mimikatz for Windows here. So that shows you how you can basically create a monitor and tweak this to your liking. So if there are certain files you don't want, you can add custom rules in there. You could also do things that are system events. So specific things, maybe, I don't know, you don't want users changing the firewall, you don't want them installing different software, those sorts of things. This process will allow you to create different rules for different applications and different settings on the machine. So now that we've seen this alert in the Discover section, probably a good idea to just quickly cover this. So you can create your own discovery, check anything else you want. It uses the dashboard query language. You can put in here, say you want firewall or whatever it is, and build up your query. So for example, we could say, so instead of level 12 to 14, for example, we could just say it's between, and then we could do say 2 and 12 and click save, and then click update. And then we'd find all of the events that happened between those two. So again, a really powerful way to drill into all of the events that are happening across all of the machines on your estate. Now, one thing I did quickly want to cover before I wrap this video up, I won't show a demonstration of this, but I did want to talk about what it can actually do. Now, on the capabilities section in their documentation, you'll see here that there's a number of really interesting sounding things, and they are. We've got file integrity monitoring, which basically checks the integrity of files, checks for changes in folders. So really good for scanning things that come in. And what you can actually do with that is build upon that to do malware-based detection. So you can actually build this in with things like, if you had ClamAV, for instance, you could put a rule in there to detect a known file. So if something flags as a bad signature, then do X. You can actually take that a step further with the active response section. Now what that can do is tag in with something like VirusTotal, and it can check the signature of any newly added files against their repository of known bad. So if a known bad file is found, for example, maybe it's in an upload repository, you could automatically then just have a script that goes and deletes it. So Wazuh almost becomes a bit like an antivirus scanner because it's looking for signatures and then it's doing an action off the back of it. One other thing to note is if you wanted to simplify this process or you didn't want to use an agent, there is agentless monitoring, which uses an SSH tunnel between the client and the server, and it can be managed and polled basically all through that connection. So what do you think of Wazuh then? I think it's an amazing piece of tech. I'm probably not going to run it in my home lab just because I think it's overkill, but definitely learn it if you're going to go into a cybersecurity career or you're really interested in SIEMs or how you can improve, do automation, automatic detection, how all of that stuff works. I can't believe that this is free and open source. It's kind of unheard of. I really want to know if you're using this out in the wild, so please do drop a comment below. Let me know about your experiences, let me know why you're using it, and let me know if you're kind of going to continue using it. Anyway, if you've liked this video, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe, and if you do want me to cover more on Wazuh, just drop a note below on what you want me to cover. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.